Hi there. I'm going to walk you through how we can set up a new AEM project from scratch. You can see I've got AEM running right now, and it's currently empty. It's literally just been installed, and if I go into sites, you can see I have nothing there. So we want to work out how can we quickly get started. Now, there is a great tutorial created called the Weekend Tutorial that walks you through, if you're a developer, how to actually go and build everything out from scratch. But I want to show you a very condensed version, focus more from a front-end developer perspective around how you can just bootstrap a project, get it up and running, and actually start styling within a matter of minutes. So let's have a look at that. All right, so I am in AEM Sites, and the first thing I want to talk about is this concept of the AEM project archetype. This is Adobe Engineering, Adobe Consulting, and some of our partners all coming together and saying, what is the best way to create a project? And while you've got a lot of options, this is now the most endorsed, blessed way of doing so. Now, I'm not going to go through all the detail here. To fast track it, the way we need to do is call one simple command and pass parameters of how we like our project set up. So let's have a look at that. So you can see here I have my my notepad set up ready with all the different options. So for instance, I've got the package name. I'm going to use We Telco as a fictitious phone company. I'm using cloud, although this works for not just AEM cloud service, but also AEM 6.5. And then, some various titles. I'm including a dispatcher configuration. I'm using the generic front-end module, not the single-page application version. And I'll leave the rest as is. So I'm going to copy-paste that. We'll come into my terminal. I'm just going to change the desktop for the demo. Let me try that one more time. All right, and we run this. And it's now going to go through and download the relevant parts off the internet and give me back that project folder on my desktop. So we're done. We now have a live AEM project. So let me go into the directory, if I can spell correctly. And let's just open this up in Visual Studio Code. That's the editor I've been using for the last year or so, and you can see my project is here and up and running. All right, so to get this into AEM, we need to, again, run another Maven command that's going to deploy it. So let me do that now. So it's Maven clean install -p auto install package. And they go across. And what it's doing is, what Maven does is effectively runs a build script. And it's going to go through each of these different modules, these folders, compile them, and actually then bind them up and deploy them into AEM for us auto-magically. So you can see it's chugging away and doing that while it's running, and it may take a minute or so. I just want to walk you through this directory structure so you're aware of what's what. Now the IT folders here, the launcher and the test, is really for backend integration code. That's where if you need to put any Java classes for extensions, etc., that's the place to do it. I'm not going to go anywhere near that for this exercise because I want to focus on front end and how we can build a site and build styling very, very quickly. And so below that, you can see I have UI apps. This is where if I go into the source, into the directory, you can see I have my component. And we're using core components here. This is, again, a library of production-ready widgets that I can use straight away in my site without doing any extra work. The Archetype has actually set them up for my project, added a reference to the actual core components that ship, and so I can use them in my project. So that's good. That's set up for me. It's also set up for me under the content structure here, my configuration folder, where I have all my templates defined and so on. So that is really useful for me. And then finally, of course, I have my content itself. And so here we'll see we've got a folder for asset management. We have our site defined, and we have some example experience fragments configured as well. So with all of these items together, we are good for a project. Now again, while this is running, the other thing I would do is I typically create shortcuts for a few of these folders here in Visual Studio. So I go up to here, add folder to workspace, and you'll see that I'll go into eTelco, I'll go into apps, into source, main, content, and then select apps. And so that now gives me, direct access to my components. That works well. And then let me go into here one more time. And I'm going to do the same thing for another directory, which is my UI front end. We'll go into source, we'll go into main, we'll go into webpack, and we'll hit add. And we'll come back to that one in a moment. So while I can go through the whole path, I just find it easy to be able to go into my components, go into my styling as needed. All right, so it looks like that's completed. We'll come back to Visual Studio Code in a moment, but let's go over to AEM. And if I refresh this screen, we should see my site. Here it is. So here's my WeTelco site. This is ready to go, so I can use this. I've got a language masters set up with an English variant of that. And then you can see here, I also have the US version that's related back to that. So I don't have to worry about setting up live copy, definitions, etc. That's all done by the Archetype for me, and I can just expand from there. But if we go into the actual page itself, it's loading up now a complete example with all the core components all ready to use and some example styling. And if you're looking at my screen, by the way, and you're wondering, it's taking a little bit to render, that is the first time compiling of AEM. So it's calling the classes that need to render a page for the very time, because I literally just started AEM before I started recording. This allows you to, effectively render the page for the first time. Once that's done, and it's almost done now, that's good for the rest of my development experiences. All right, so I've got my page here. Let's have a look at the kind of authoring capability as we look at this. Okay, so here is my site, and it's kind of looking okay. Let's have a look what we can do with it. So we can bring out the side panel. You can see I've got asset, got component here. If I want to bring out an extra component, I could go ahead and maybe add another text box. I can drag and drop that. I can go in, I can make some type, and I can say, this is really cool, as an example. Great. What if I want images? Well, again, we can do one of two things. We can either drag and drop an image component. We can go in and we can actually upload an asset, by clicking here. Or what we can do, and what's preferred, is to use the asset management part of AEM. So let me go ahead and navigate to that. So I'll just go back to the home screen, into files, into my telco folder here, and if I go to my desktop, in my stock folder, might just grab one image. Let's go and grab this image, and go and grab this image. I think the other one's coming up. It'll be there in a second. Anyway, let's go back to our page and hit refresh. And the reason we did that is to reload the asset library on the left hand side. So it means that I can go and drag and drop these images in here if the component's already there, or if I want to, let me just delete that. I can go and just drag and drop images to begin with, and if I grab multiple of them, I get them in there, and that looks pretty good. Now I can start to think about styling. So first thing I might want to do is use the default grid that I get with the project. So I click and I can actually hit the layout it allows me to go and change the width of this component. So you can see I've effectively said just use half of that grid. Let's grab the other image and do the same. I don't think I can count, so let's make this one a little bit bigger again. There we go. So I've now got that view of the images side by side, looking pretty good. And I'm going to bring in a different component here, which is my teaser component. We'll go right at the very top. And this might be more of a promotional message. So let's go and grab an image. Let's put that in here, and let's go and configure it. And in here we'll put our title and say we have the latest phones. Come check them out. And then we might put a call to action. So we want people to be able to, check them out. And we'll just put a link, and I don't have much content here at the moment, so I'll just link back to this same page. And we'll click on done. And you can see right now we've got a fairly, to be honest, average looking site. If I hit preview, it's got some content in here, but remember that I've set this up in a matter of minutes, have it deployed, and I've got the functionality. I didn't have to go and do any configuration. I don't really have to understand what AEM's doing at this point in time. So let's think about what we would do next. Obviously, there's no styling here. We want to make sure our brand is reflected. And this is where some of the enhancements to the workflow have really been put into place. Of course, we're using these core components, these items that allow you to bring and drag and drop these items onto the screen without worrying about the code that's already been done for you, but also the styling workflow. So I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code here. And remember before I mentioned this Webpack folder. Now, if I go under the Webpack folder, you can see that I have a placeholder for the style sheet for every single component. And if we look at these, for instance, the teaser, right now they're blank, but it gives me an idea of the different class names for each component and how I can define it. And in fact, if I go back to the component library here, as a reference, if I go back to that teaser, it's going to show me, various options here. So it's teaser with an image. It will show you the markup, so you can actually see the HTML if you want to go ahead and style that, which is great as a reference. But how do I get this into my project? Well, here's one of the nice enhancements is that even if I don't know anything about AEM, good chance of I'm doing front-end work, I've probably come across Webpack or, some of the node-based tools to allow me to go and preview a site. And that's exactly what the Archetype deploys for you now when I'm building a project. So let's have a look at how this works. I'm going to change into that front-end directory, and if I list this out, you can see that I've got a package JSON file there, which gives me a clue. I can see some Webpack files there. So all I need to do to actually start previewing this is to say npm run start. It's actually now running. This is a local site. You'll see it's localhost port 8080. So directly from the project, it's now rendering this page and allows me to start thinking about the styling of this before I even interact with AEM, which means that if I know nothing about AEM, I can get this project code and I can start to style the various template pages. So let's have a look at how we do that. So first of all, let's go in and there's a few things here to point out. So the page right now is this index HTML. That's the reference page. That's why it looks slightly different right now from my my AEM site, and I'll come to that in a moment. But then if I go into the site details, you can start to see some placeholder styles that were put in for that default project. So I'm going to go into the main container here, and let's just put in a max width. Let's put in 1024. That sounds good. Margin, we'll make margin auto. Yes, let's hit save. Let's go back to our project, and you can see now my content is centered, fixed width, so it's looking good. By the way, I'm not a designer, so just go with me on this. But you know, my project's looking pretty good. But remember, it doesn't quite look like the content that I just created. So let's do a live change here. So I'm going to say, let's just call this, you know, We Telco for our brand. We've got some, you know, teaser content here, etc. Looking pretty good. So what we'll do is we'll hit preview. In fact, let's go into the menu and say view in admin. Oh, not view in admin, sorry. Let's go view as published. And you'll notice you get this error. Now, I knew I was going to get this error because when I deployed the Archetype, I said no samples. And what it's trying to do is render a component that's not actually there. It's a little gotcha with the component. You can see this hello world component. It's actually presented, if I show you here, this is the expected output. But if we didn't deploy the Java classes because we kept it clean, if you go back, remember I was doing the Archetype here. This includes samples will not deploy the Java classes to support that. So long-winded way of explaining that if you want to do the workflow I'm doing, you simply have to go in and delete this component that's deployed on the page. I do that, I hit refresh, and I get my page rendered as if it was on a published server for production. All right, why am I doing this? Well, I've started on a site, I've dragged and dropped a few components. I now effectively know what content I want on a screen to hand off to my design team. So I can say view page source. I can copy paste this. I can go into Visual Studio Code, into my static file here, and I can now replace that code, hit save, and now my example page, again running on port 8080, is actually showing me the HTML content that I managed in AEM locally, and it's already pulling in those design style tweaks, which is awesome, right? So, by the way, this is not AEM content anymore. I've obviously got a static file, but the imagery is coming from AEM, and so I don't have to go and load and manage the different images as part of my project right now. So there's a few things we can do here. Obviously, this teaser component doesn't look that good. So again, I can go ahead and style that. So let's go and look at the components. My teaser here. If I want to actually put something in, so let's go ahead and put in a background color. Let's just put in I don't know, something obvious like this right now. Let's hit save, and unfortunately it's not working. You need to make one little change to make sure that this is picked up. So what I'm going to do here is when I go into the main file, you'll notice that it's looking for components on the same level. So you just need to go back one level here, and if I bring back the page, now I've got that red background, so I know that the various files have been picked up appropriately. Now, I'm not going to bore you with me trying to design on the fly. As I mentioned before, I'm not a designer. I appreciate design. I attempt design, but I sometimes leave it for the experts. But I quickly put together an example here, and I'm just going to copy paste this code here. Let's hit save, and let's go back to that file. And so now you can see that I've just put in some example code markup for my banner here, my teaser component. So that's looking pretty good, but this is where we see often people say, well, this is great, but what if I want the text on the right hand side? And this is where people then start creating multiple components. with AEM, the idea is that we can separate the definition of the style from the actual component itself and link them via the UI. So let's have a look at that. The first thing I have to do, however, is get my style that I've just created back into AEM, so we can look at it. So if I refresh this page back here in AEM, we're not going to see any of those stylings picked up yet. So let's have a look at that. So hopefully you know what to do here. I'm going to cancel out of that command that was running. I'm going to go back up here and run my Maven command again. Again, it's going to deploy the project for me. Should be a lot quicker the second time round though, because it's already downloaded all the dependencies, etc. So it's a matter of just compiling it, compiling all the pre-compiling of the CSS classes, etc., and then uploading it for me. So we'll give that just a second, and we'll see those changes back in AEM. All right, now while that's happening, I did want to point out that there's quite a lot of options in the way that I can handle multiple files. So this index.html, it's great if you've got one template, but reality is you'll have more than one. So the idea here is that you can create one for a home page, one for a content page, one for whatever page you need. And then if you actually looked at the, where is it here? The in the Webpack files, so back up here in UI front end, if we look at our Webpack DV, you can see here it's actually choosing which file to actually go and build, and it's also pointing to localhost right now. So again, if your AEM server is remote or deployed in AEM cloud services, you can point to that, and then you can locally develop without AEM actually locally running, which is pretty powerful. And then you can make different versions of this Webpack configuration. You can see here, just if I go into the startup here, I could easily, I was running npm start. If I duplicated this and said, start home or start, content template, I could duplicate this and change the name of the file and get that working. All right, so that's how I can start to work with different files. Let's go back into AEM. Let's hit refresh. And now we have our content managed with the latest style. If I go back and refresh this screen within AEM, I've got those style changes being reflected, which is great. And as you'd expect, I can go in and still update this content. Let me just say cool phones. And you can see exactly how that looks. But remember I said, well, what if I wanted the content, the text on the right-hand side versus left-hand side? Well, I did one sneaky thing, so you didn't have to see me deploy the code twice. If I go back into Visual Studio, right down the bottom of that definition, I have another class called banner right. And if I, let's just see what happens here. If I, oops, let's not put it there. If I go back into my UI front end and I run npm run start, so I'm still back in local development mode. Here is my page rendering now. If I was to take this class and open it in my developer tools here in my browser, if I find the actual teaser, and it's important that it's the actual teaser, not the CMP component teaser. It's the parent here. If I went in and added banner right, you can see I've actually implied a new class. And if I go back into Visual Studio Code, you can see it's just changing the CSS Flex definition, so it's effectively swapping the order of those two components here. So great, but we don't want people editing code in AEM. The whole point is to make it code free for content authors. So the way we're going to do this is, I'm going to find the right tab. we want to put an option, a drop down under this component so you can select the style that you're after. How do we do that? Well, I go into the template, and this is something a more super user would do as they're defining how a content author can use various settings. Within the template, I'm looking at the teaser component here, and I can go into styles, and this is where I can add additional styles. So I can say, okay, banner right, and I can give it a CSS class of banner right, and we can hit done, and we can come back here and hit refresh. And now when I click on this, I get this little paintbrush and allows me to click on banner right, and our text moves over to the right. I turn it off, our text comes back to the left. Now I can do this for many variations of a teaser or any component where I might have different styles and variations and markups. One component to match multiple styles of the way that's being deployed. So it's a great way of working through the needs of a project and simplifying, reducing the head count or the component count for that project. So I'm hoping now you've seen, some of the benefits here. I'm going to give you one last thing here because I know a lot of people don't do this. You have to get comfortable with committing content to a code management tool. So if you haven't done this already, click Initialize Repository. Go and give it a name. So I'm going to give it a right repository, and it's going to link all the files. I'm going to click plus. We'll say it's the initial commit, and now I'll be able to track any changes that I make in the project as well. And that's just rounding it off good practice around how to go ahead and start building an AEM project the right way with a front-end development perspective. Hopefully that's been of value to you. Leave feedback in the comments. Talk to you all soon. Bye.